Welcome to The Impact Effect, hosted by conscious leadership expert Tom Eddington, advisor to some of the world's most successful companies and CEOs, where each week we help executives, entrepreneurs, and organizers become more effective leaders while growing businesses that are making an impact in the world. And now, here's Tom.
Hi, welcome to the Impact Effect Network, where we discuss making business matter through conscious leadership. I'm Tom Eddington, and I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Jill Ratliff, to our conversation today. Welcome, Jill.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Jill, you're an author, you're an executive coach, you've had very senior roles in HR and leadership, and I'd love for you to just share a bit about who you are and how you got to be doing the things that you're doing in the world.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. So my background is corporate America. I like to say I graduated Georgia Tech and went straight into, Fortune 10 company. Back in the day, I went into Dow Chemical and started my career in sales. I spent very little time, formative years, maybe 5 or so, really getting grounded in, customer and business and how all that works. And then very naturally found that I gravitated to the human resource side of things, to people, culture, leadership. HR came to be called, people and culture and a lot of other things. And I think rightly so, due to the criticality of understanding what people, culture, and leadership can do, for a business, right? And for the world. So that's been my journey. I've been in and out of a lot of different parts of it. And ultimately, I find myself really a student of leadership, because I think so much starts and ends there. And it's been a journey. A lot of what I thought I knew about it changes, honestly, every couple of years. and I think most recently, since I retired from corporate America 4 years ago, and I started my own practice to really go deep in this subject, my views have changed again fairly substantively.
Well, thank you. And just to dive in a bit into your corporate career, what was it that drew you into, at the time, HR or human resources?
It's kind of interesting. I started out in sales, like I mentioned, and the natural path was to go into marketing and then into sales management. But I worked at that time for Dow Chemical USA. This is back in the 70s. Dow had a requirement that as you moved up in your functional area, so if you wanted to go into sales management, you had to go through some other function before you could go into leadership or go into management, finance and IT and R&D, which was clearly not on the agenda for me. So you had to pick another functional area, and you had to do a 2-year rotation in that. So to me, HR seemed logical, and I was interested, and I went for my 2-year assignment and never came back.
And can you talk a bit about that journey over 35 years? What you experienced, what you learned, and how it shaped and informed how you think about leadership?
I actually first worked for the LA Times for 2 years. Publishing was unique, so I did a stint there, and then really found myself in PepsiCo, where I spent 9 years. And that was really where I got sort of introduced to really the significant role that people and culture play in an organization. PepsiCo is known for that. They play high value on those things. And in that role, I really got deep into organization development, organization effectiveness, succession planning, a lot of those things. So that was really my deep dunk. And after PepsiCo was a bit of a learning ground, 9 years there, dunked in that discipline. And then I moved to the financial services industry and worked for ING, which again, PepsiCo is in the restaurant division, where they, Taco Bell in particular. So your profitability for a week is like too big a pinch of cheese on too many tacos, right? I mean, it's a tightly managed business. So you learn a lot about how you train people, because that was everything around profitability. Well, I got recruited away from there to ING, where, get this, $500 billion in assets. And again, it was just an entirely and completely different culture. And when I went there, ING was in the process of making North America its second home market. And I'm sure you were at Hewitt back in the day, probably remember this.
Yep.
So that was North America, Mexico, US, and Canada, predominantly the US at the time. And we had 14 operating companies in those 3 countries. That was really it when I went there. How do you put 14 operating companies together? It starts obviously with what's a vision for doing that? Why would you do that? Then it circles all the way through the systems, the culture, the processes, the leaders. You no longer have 14 CEOs. You now have a country CEO. A lot of CEOs, are going to lose their jobs in that model. So how do you figure out who does, who doesn't, who do you pick? How do you reorganize? So that was like a PhD, honestly, 5 years of doing that. We made, I want to say, in the ballpark of $7 billion worth of acquisitions in 4 years, and also started up 2 major divisions like ING Direct, which was grown from nothing. So that was, again, big part of my journey. Left there, spent some time then got into the payroll business for a little while. And then I was recruited away by a CEO of a company called Assurant. And by the way, somewhere in there, I took a year off because my children, I was on a plane all the time. I was gone. I was traveling. I hit that mom problem of I just loved my job, but I didn't feel good about what I was doing. So I tried to stay home and be a stay-at-home mom, and that lasted about 8 months. But I did know I had to make some changes to go back into my career. So I took a director level job, director of global leadership development, and did that for 3 or 4 years while my kids got into high school. Then from a director level job, I got a phone call to be the executive vice president of HR for a $2 billion company. I did one interview with the CEO, and the next morning he called and made me the offer. So I'd never interviewed anybody else but him. All my interviews were after I'd already accepted the job. So that taught me something. I stayed with that CEO for 8 years. And that's the place that I retired from to start my own practice. So that was sort of my corporate journey. And then, a life crisis, honestly, really precipitated not my love for this work, because I already had that, but a fundamentally different way to look at it. And I say that because I know you share that, how a life crisis can reshape how you think about what you thought you knew. Brings me to the book that I wrote and to be, here with you on the podcast. And if it had to fit under an umbrella, it would fit under conscious leadership. And what does that even mean? And more importantly, how do we get more of it? Because we need it.
Well, thank you for sharing that background and history and some of your insights and learnings. And I'd love to dive into two of the topics that I know are important to you around trust and collaboration. And before we go there, though, if you could just share with me your definition of conscious leadership.
Sure. From personal experience is where my definition comes from. And it's taking 100% responsibility for your life, period. And I would add to that, and learning to master your moments by knowing how to stay present in the moment, whatever it presents to you.
Yeah, it's I can speak from my own personal experience. When we have those experiences, we sort of backfill with the underpinnings of the academia, the research, and everything else. It's very much a lived experience that after the fact we try and explain and understand what the hell we just went through.
You could not be more right about that, because one of the things that I always say to people is pick any door, meaning music, movies, films, literature, writers, poets, the philosophers, the psychologists, the scientists. I'm a big Einstein fan. I learned a lot of what I think, by looking at it through the science. And I can talk more about that as sort of we get into some of those principles and why that's the way. Ultimately, what's true is you pick any discipline and follow it all the way to the center, and you're going to meet everybody else there in the middle. Doesn't really matter. Sports, I'm a student of sports. My son's a professional athlete. So it really doesn't matter like what door you pick. When you start looking for the truth of something about life that pertains to all of us, you can find it in a lot of different ways.
Well, I can certainly, listening to you share that, I can certainly see why you would appreciate Einstein so much. And he's certainly known for his science, but he's equally known for his spirituality. And it's absolutely beautiful if people take the time to go into his life and really understand how the science and spirituality were in a constant dance.
And I actually think that's a movement that's really happening on the planet today. And I think if you go back to the first millennium, the year 1000 to maybe the 1600s, everything planet Earth was dominated by spirituality, mysticism, the God men, right? It all was that until there was a, crumbling of that structure and a realization that those God men were human and fallible and and science really came in. And then we went, boom, totally the other way. And it had to be scientifically provable. It had to be see it, test it, taste it, smell. It had to be repeatable in an experiment until somebody figured out that the observer actually affects the outcome of the experiment. So there goes that problem. And then Einstein, right? E equals MC squared, right? The most powerful formula that changed our lives and is still changing our lives is that simple.
Yeah. I love seeing that pendulum swing back, and I don't know where it's going to end up, but just seeing the movement of the pendulum back and integration of spirituality.
Right. It's like everything, right? It's this and that, masculine, feminine, yin and yang. Like it's that movement, right? It's balance. Like that's why as an HR person, and I know you'll appreciate this because you're a Hewitt guy, right? Work-life balance. Like who even ever made that up? It had to be HR people, right? Because there is only balance. There is only life.
Yeah.
Work is simply a part of it. Home's a part of it. Who you are is a part of everything. Like there is no like, oh, okay, I'm going to go over and be work balanced for 3 days and I'm going to be life balanced on the weekend. Like we tried to figure out a way to make that concept work, but it really didn't work very well. Most of what I know now is, by the way, of 30 years of trying everything and seeing actually what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, when technology became really pervasive 20 years ago or so, that's when we started these conversations around work-life balance, because it was impossible to turn work off. And the dance that companies have gone through, and now especially in the last 6 or 7 months with COVID.
And now here we are right back, because, have you ever heard that saying, like, it's the Earth School and you come here to listen until you learn it, it keeps repeating itself. Well,
Yeah.
Here we go. Technology has given us the gift of 24/7. And if you don't have an inner directed discipline about the value of your time and what you're really up to and all of that, then it's easy for me to see why people are overwhelmed. Many things that are valuable are hard. And so I'm not saying this isn't hard, but I'm just simply saying it has a ton of potential to be valuable as well.
Yeah, and with there's always been a need for conscious leadership, but in the last 20 years or so, it's become there's been an accelerated need for conscious leadership just because of the issues that you were just identifying.
Well, and the biggest reason is what we're doing is not working. Well, how do you know? Because life on planet Earth has never been better, and that would be true. Right? People 100 years ago in the United States didn't have comforts. But then the flip side of that is, we've never had more depression, more anxiety, more people on numbing sort of programs and medications and drugs. And we've never had college level suicides at higher rates. And on a more practical, even level closer to home of people who aren't suffering those extreme things, engagement has never been lower in the 20 years since Gallup first put it on the radar. So as HR people, if we're not looking at that and asking ourselves, what are we not seeing, then we're not paying attention. Because if it were that easy, and if the solutions we were putting in place were the right solutions, we wouldn't be where we are right now.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the solutions. And you write about collaboration and trust as being two pieces of the solution.
Right. Yeah, and trust and collaboration came the focal point of the book because, if you're going to go into a palace or you're going to go into an apartment, you still have to open a front door and get in there, right? So. That makes sense, right? So this subject of leadership is like going into a mansion, right? There's hundreds of rooms, there's a billion different ways to teach it and think about it. So it's a mansion, but you still have to have a front door. And so for me, that door is I picked trust and collaboration. One, because trust has eroded on every level of leadership across the world. And I'm sure you've seen it. And don't you just even know as a person, have you lost trust in our government? And even in our companies, right? Look at the starting, with the Enrons and then the banking fiasco. There's just a basic loss of trust in our leaders today. So that's a big subject because trust is everything to bring people along and to do great things together. So that picked for that reason. And the collaboration, again, similarly, nobody does anything great alone.
Right.
We're just better together, period. And yet, I tell a story. I took my daughter Danielle to work with me. She was trying to start to get her compass on what she wanted to study, and of course she was going to go into human resources like her mom. She was going to love it. I had it all mapped out. So I took her to work with me for Take Your Kid to Work Day. She followed me around all day, went to my meetings. At the end of the day, I'm like, "What do you think, honey?" She goes, "Wow, it's worse than high school." That was her comment. And I'm like, "What do you mean it's worse than high school?" She goes, "I don't know. Well, it just seems like your silos, as you call them, are just like high school cliques. And like you just go around and try to get, the band players to, play nice with the jocks and the jocks to, she goes, it's just like all you spend your whole day doing is trying to get people in different functions to get along with each other." She goes, "Sounds like a lot of work to me." And, after that, she made the comment. She goes, "Mom, I just thought once you got out of high school and college and you were a grown up, that you knew how to get along with each other at work." It's a very eye-opening. It was very eye-opening. So collaboration, I think, it's just one word, like so many words in the world. But when you think about what it really means, right? It means connection. It means not taking what other people say personally. It means giving grace to somebody having a bad day, deeply stressed if you're not. It means prioritizing people over profit. Been in business long enough to know one without the other isn't going to work either, because then you've got no job to give people.
Right.
But you have to figure out a way. Culture is just important. And I think, we go around making it so complicated, and we'll get into that in a minute. But one of the really foundational principles that I learned from my brother, which is my life crisis, and also the most brilliant and inspiring thing that ever happened in my life, both. We've overcomplicated just about every single subject in trying to find the solution to it.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Who you are is how you lead. Conscious leadership is an intuitive, intentional process requiring an open heart, an open mind, and a committed desire to fully own how you show up in the world. If you're a CEO, a solopreneur, or a community leader, Tom Eddington's ebook helps you amplify your strengths, making you the best version of yourself. Download the ebook today and become a part of bringing conscious leadership to the planet.
Well, there's a lot there. And, for me, I love your metaphor of the mansion or the apartment and having a door of entry. And I think about conscious leadership as the foundation of that building.
Absolutely.
And without the conscious leadership, the other stuff doesn't happen.
You would love this. It's like being locked in a prison cell and eating organic. Right? Like without that foundation, it's like that. You're going to put all these leadership principles and things in place, but there's still going to be something so fundamentally missing if that foundation's not strong, that house is coming down. I don't care what kind of beautiful artwork you hung on the walls, right? If that foundation's not solid enough to hold, then all those other things become less important. And so all the years I've had of hiring consultants and building leadership programs and sending them to offsites and putting them on tall poles and telling their coworkers to hold them, and so they could try all that stuff that we did, right? In the end of the day, isn't getting us where we need to be. We've got to rethink, what is the missing piece? What do we need to do differently?
I love your daughter's observation, and the irony is that, as human beings, we come into this world hardwired for collaboration.
Totally.
We come into this world hardwired to cooperate and to work together. And somewhere along the way, we unlearn that.
And that's why I call it, my work, I call it the human operating system, right? We do not actually understand this technology, and it's the most brilliant technology on the earth. We got to have a different education. And if you're a leader of an organization, a CEO or any leader of a large function, and you don't understand, that's your first, best leverage point to get the results that you want to get out of your organization.
With collaboration and trust, where do you start in that conversation with leaders you're working with, organizations you're working with, and how do you help them understand what you mean when you talk about collaboration and trust?
So my book, I start with concepts, because I think until you have a different mindset like your skill set is not that relevant, right? Because, without a different mindset, you're going to keep reaching in the toolbox and pulling out the same tools anyway. And I say this kind of tongue in cheek because I think this man is brilliant, but John Maxwell's 21 laws, irrefutable laws of leadership, right? I studied this for a living for 25 years and I couldn't tell you what law 9 is. So on Tuesday morning at 8:15, when a meeting's off the rails and the IT folks and the marketing folks are not getting along, like which one of those 21 irrefutable laws of leadership is going to help me, right? So I start by setting up sort of some foundational concepts, and I got those foundational concepts from my brother. So maybe it'd be a good time to just tell that story or introduce
Sure.
that here, right? So my brother's 4 years younger than me. We're 2 middle children. We've been close our whole lives. And when he was 52 years old, he was diagnosed with one of those horrendous cancers. It's a sarcoma cancer, and sarcomas are 2% of all known cancers. He had MTNSP, which is 1% of all known sarcomas. So like I said to him, man, Keith, when you pick a cancer, you don't mess around, do you? You really go right for the mountain. And so it was, devastating. And he was essentially told, go home and get your affairs in order, right? There's just nothing. There's not a zero for this. And, it's going to be fast. Well, the short story of that is he lived 4.5 years. So it tells you something about my brother. More remarkable is that as he went through that journey and why he stayed that long is because he had to figure some things out. As he said, he had a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful children, and he said, I'm just not going to go until I figure out, like, what do I not know? What can I see? What's happening to me? What are the possibilities for my healing? So in the end, there were 5 things he told all of us, his loved ones. And he said them at different times in different ways, but I distilled them down to the principles upon which it changed everything about my life. And in particular, the way we live, lead, and love. And those are, and I've said it already many times, simple is better, less is more. And I could unpack that and teach a whole class on just that principle. Vice Chairman Charlie Munger, right, at Berkshire Hathaway says, take a simple idea and take it seriously. Richard Branson says anybody can make anything complex, brilliant people make things simple, right? So we know that's true, but what does that mean in leadership? So that's a foundation. Desmond Tutu said, Jill, life is supposed to be fun. Like the point was, we're supposed to be fun. It's about humor. And Rob Bell, right, a minister in Michigan who's really well known for a lot of advancements in consciousness as well, said he got invited to go to a talk, to share a stage with the Dalai Lama and with Desmond Tutu. And he was freaking out. And he thought, what do I say? What do I do? Like he's nervous. And then he gets there. Dalai Lama says, Toots, how you doing? And Desmond Tutu goes over and he says, what do you mean, how am I doing? Well, what have you been doing? You put some weight on tonight. And the two just bantered like normal people banter. And, the Buddha is seen smiling. Most of the views of the Buddha are smiling. So I think we've lost the idea that it really was supposed to be fun. Leadership's supposed to be fun. Life's supposed to be fun, despite, and that's not to minimize our challenges, but somewhere we got to get the fun back. 3, he said, be kind, period. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care what kind of message you have to deliver. I don't care how bad the performance is as a CEO or anyone else. There's still a kind way to deliver a tough message. 4th, he said, you don't have any problems. Life, we came to solve problems. That's the game. That's like what makes it, that's where we get to be unique. That's where we get to, and then last, he said, joy is all around you. It's literally all around you. And you're not seeing it. You're not catching it. And that's stealing, your ability to live a life you love and to be a great leader. And my brother was one of a handful of Americans who was master certified in Kaizen by a Japan master. So he flew all over the world helping companies, as he liked to say, get out of their own way. And so he was already in this work. His life work was already in this space as well. So a lot of these principles, and when we talked about them, he and I could talk about them through that lens. And before he passed away, he said to me, one of the last things he said to me is, Jill, you have to tell them. You have to get out this message and you have to tell them. Why I wrote my book. And then all of what I talk about in my book, it's in or is reinforced by those 5 principles. And it looks at 3 domains of leadership. Self-mastery, you cannot lead others until you can lead yourself first. Relationship mastery, you have the ability to get along with literally anyone, regardless of their differences, their problems, their challenges, how they're showing up, if you know what to do. Mastery of change and transformation, like how do you learn to not resist change? How do you learn to navigate change? And so all 3 of those are that coursework that I teach in each of those, or collectively, or in a keynote level. And as I work with my executives one-on-one, I don't teach all that. I simply meet them where they are. And then I pull the right tool out of the toolbox, right?
You're watching the Impact Effect Network, the world's first 24-hour on-demand business and leadership video and podcast network, bringing conscious leadership to a global audience.
Well, I'm digesting all of that, and I'm trying to figure out who got the better gift, your brother, or the gift that he left behind.
Oh my gosh, Tom, I can't believe you said that. When I got the phone call from my sister-in-law, and I just left Starbucks and I was walking, our corporate offices at the time were just off Wall Street. And I was walking from Starbucks to my office. It was a beautiful sunny July morning. And she called me, and she just, as soon as I answered the phone, she said, Jill, Keith has cancer and it's bad. That was the first thing she said. And Tom, my thought after I got over the shock of it was I was going to ride in on my white horse and I was going to help my little brother, like, conquer this cancer demon. I was going to do it. And man, did that script get flipped. He clearly got a big gift for what he went through, but inexplicable fashion was more joy and more hope and more optimism with those of us that love him than we could possibly have ever had losing someone we loved so much. And I don't know many people that have that kind of courage. I think that wisdom, I think I might do a TED Talk, dying people don't lie. Right? Because Keith said that to me. When you're going, everything you thought that was so complex becomes so simple. And he said, we have too much knowledge and not enough wisdom. So these were like the things he was just dropping all the time, like just dropping these pearls, and so I wrote as many of them down as I could. And, it became the basis for why I left my really lucrative, big corporate job, doing what I was doing, and decided I needed to get out in the world and get into this game and start talking about these things.
Well, I'm glad you did. It's certainly been part of the inspiration for me doing what I've been doing since I got sick.
Right.
Is you go through those experiences and you do fundamentally understand the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Right. Absolutely. And behavior change, by the way, going back to leadership development, behavior change loves simplicity. 3-page development plans, all these things people are supposed to go do, they go right on the shelf. Next year, when it's time to do succession plan or meeting with the board, you whip them out, dust them off, change a few words. They don't change. I say on my website, become the kind of leader other people want to follow, but become is the operative word. Like, if you don't really care enough and you don't really want to, then you're not going to. But what I believe is that the vast majority of leaders do want to. They just don't know how to get out of their way.
Yeah.
So therefore they settle. But I get in front of them and we talk, and I find out where they're not happy, why aren't they happy? And then you can unpack that a little bit for them. Then they're all in, and they get a personal gift, but then the people they lead get a huge gift, right? Every time one leader becomes more conscious, that leader not only affects their life and their family, but affects all the people in that organization that they get to impact through that leadership. So that scales my work, right? Which feels great and is why I love to work with leaders.
Well, I loved your reference to His Holiness and the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. One of my all-time favorite books is the Book of Joy that was written a couple of years ago.
Yes, I love that book.
Yeah, and just the relationship the two of them have, and how they both exhibit absolute joy in their daily lives.
Happiness is opposite of sad. Like, if I'm not sad, I'm happy. Something happened that made me happy. It's circumstantial usually. Joy exists regardless of the circumstance. That's what Keith meant by joy is all around you.
Yeah.
Like it's all around you anyway. And I wrote an article for CEO World Magazine. I think that's the one. But anyway, I talked about love at work. And I like to talk about love at work because it's shocking. And people are like, oh, no, I don't even like my coworkers. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about love at work. That's totally off limits. But the kind of love I'm talking about is agape love, right? Agape love has no object of it.
Yes.
It's not, I love my coworkers. It's just, I love, period. Like it's just a state and condition of your being. And when you get that, and when you notice why you're not in that state, because why wouldn't we want to be? The answer is always the same. It's because you're afraid of something. It's fear. So then that very quickly gets you over there to say, so, okay, there's only sort of 3 primal fears. Like, again, nothing's that complicated. Einstein said, when you change the way you see something, everything you see begins to change. And it opens a whole new set of possibilities. So when you can get people to see something they were blocked to or they couldn't see before, or because it's fear, they're running like hell, as fast as they can away from it. The last thing they want to do is talk about it. But if you can get them to see the benefit in that, then it opens a door. And then next thing you know, like all kinds of good things can happen. When a massive storm comes over the Rockies, the cattle herd east as fast as they can. They just run like hell. And by the time the storm catches them, many of them don't survive because they're exhausted. Whereas the buffalo heads straight into the storm. They run right west, right to the Rockies, and they meet the storm head on. The storm passes them and they survive. So that's a little bit like the fear game to me. Like, if somebody gives you a way that you actually can they see that you won't die, if you actually look at what you're afraid of, like big, scary clothing's off of it, you're in Wizard of Oz, right? You're sitting there with the little wizard, behind the screen, creating this fear in your life that's not even real. But people like down that path, because I say it like it's so easy, right? Like it's been years and years and years of studying a lot to sort of figure these things out. And what my brother said is keep it simple, but get people to get in the game before they're staring down a life-threatening illness. And then they have to figure it out first.
What's your process? What's your approach?
So I go in a door that feels comfortable and safe and familiar to people, like a white Trojan horse, I call it. Like the black Trojan horse went in, everybody came out, and then they killed the city. The white Trojan horse sneaks in a door that everybody knows they have a problem around. And then once I'm in there, I help them see what their problem really is. And I do it through self-mastery, relationship mastery, and mastery of change and transformation. So, and then I just meet every single leader or leadership team right where they are. I don't try to take them somewhere that they, can't go from where they are. Just the next right thing, just one aha at a time, one insight at a time. And then once you get one insight, you start going, wow. Here's the phrase I hear more than any other phrase. Wow, I never thought of it that way.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Is your team tuned out? Are you looking for a powerful speaker to motivate and inspire your organization? Then Tom Eddington is the choice for keynote speaker at your next conference or event. Tom is one of the most sought-after business advisors and coaches in Silicon Valley. For over 2 decades, Tom has advised world-renowned CEOs and executives on how to catapult their organization's success, including Hewlett-Packard, NBNA Corporation, and Royal Dutch Shell. In his dynamic keynotes, Tom offers fresh new paradigms on how to create healthier, happier, and more purposeful workplaces while navigating change and generating higher degrees of success for organizations. For information on booking Tom at your next event, contact eddingtonadvisory.com.
So anyway, I just deal with people in real scenarios, stuff they're really dealing with real time, not we're going to put you in this artificial situation and see how you act. Like simulations, yeah. If you're going to be a fighter pilot, simulations are a really good idea. But if you're really trying to do personal development, simulations are not so good because there's no experience that's real to you where you feel pain or you feel freedom by doing it. The reason it doesn't work is because the situation's not real. You put people in a situation where they're now physically vulnerable. Yes. Did they get to know their coworkers better? Yes. All that's yes. They feel vulnerable. But now you put them back at work and the CIO is screaming at, one of your people because, they're delaying the project. And what are they supposed to do? They don't even how to deal with the conflict in that situation. Because now, like, this guy saved me when it was falling off the pole, but I'm really pissed right now. Like they're not practical tools to solve real life differences. So anyway, you can tell I get a little passionate about this subject.
Well, rightly so. I mean, we've got organizations that are and filled with people who are suffering.
Right. Absolutely.
Unnecessarily.
And do you know how many executives I work with that say, I just really successful people making lots of money, big titles. But I just don't feel like I see purpose in what I'm doing anymore. Do you know that story?
Oh, yeah.
Right, comes out because the purpose game that we don't even understand. Like most people can't even tell you why they do what they do or what makes them unhappy. And so, and how I see it is people say, I was thinking about leaving here and going to work for a nonprofit. And it just literally makes me laugh. I'm like, oh yeah, let me talk to you about like what it's going to be like to go be a leader in a nonprofit. And that's not anything against nonprofits. I love them. But the leadership problems are just as bad or worse over there. It's about like your ability to understand really, truly, what is your purpose? And
Right.
and again, for me, people get way too complicated. There's books and weekends and seminars. I can help somebody get a pretty decent beat on their purpose in about a 45-minute conversation. So my whole MO is simple is better, less is more, just cut to the chase. And it's different for everybody. Like your answer, your solution is not going to be somebody else's. It's like everything is like individual. You have to meet a person where they are. But it's not that hard. It's hard to do the work.
Right.
It's hard to do that. You have to be, just like it's hard to build a company. But it doesn't have to feel hard, and it doesn't have to not be enjoyable, right? You just have to be committed to it, and you have to know like that there's a gift in it for you and others. So there's meaning in it, and finding that meaning. You can find it anywhere. I don't care what job you're in, if you know how to look in the right place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because look at what you're doing. You're out like killing it, doing this thing. I'm only 2 years into this. When you have, that webinar, I'll be listening to that one because it's hard. It's hard to do this, entrepreneur thing and get out there.
Well, you absolutely, from my vantage point, you have figured it out. And thank you for the gifts that you're bringing through your book, through the work you're doing.
Well, it's my pleasure.
I'll thank your brother as well.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. He told me if I didn't do it, I would see him again, and then he'd kick my ass. So I really didn't have a choice. So thank you so much, Tom, for having me and just letting me share some of my thoughts about all of this. I really do appreciate it, and I wish you well. Well,
I've absolutely enjoyed the conversation, and I would just ask you, what would you like our viewers and listeners to take away from what they heard today?
If I honestly had to say one thing, I would say lighten up. Like, when you hear somebody saying this is awful and that's awful and, that sucks and the politics this, I would say to them, you know what, it gets way worse. We're all going to die. We're all going down. So lighten up. All we can do is what we can do. All you can do is find the joy. All you can do is stay in your lane and trust. And frankly, I guess I would leave this trust that a wisdom greater than us, an infinite divine knowing greater than all of us, is in fact governing us and all of it. And so back to, I guess I'll end back with trust. Right? There is a factor of trusting yourself and trusting life, trusting, how we got here so far, that we're going to get where we're going to, and just lighten up. We're 8 billion people on a stack of dirt hurling through the universe. Like, when you start taking it too seriously, then you're just going to steal your joy from your life.
Well, thank you for that. And for folks that want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Ratliff on LinkedIn. And then my website is my name as well, www.jillratliffleadership.com. So those are probably the two easiest paths. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Jill. It's been a joy and a pleasure spending this time in conversation with you.
Best to all of you.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Thank you for joining Tom Eddington on the Impact Effect. Visit ImpactEffectNetwork.com to connect with Tom and discover additional episodes featuring today's top leaders making a global impact through conscious leadership in the world today.